Welcome back. Hey guys, it's Alex. This is 3.5 Negotiations and Composite Finance, the most effective way to negotiate and change a financial management plan. So one of the things that I want to talk to you guys about in this video is how to operate step 4 of the money manager's process, make necessary adjustments. And this is also going to be everything from windfalls to job losses to incorporating new things like maintenance for a house or even retirement or pretty much anything else that wasn't brought up in the initial money manager's process. But before we do that, I want to cover to you guys in this video specifically about comfortably and effectively negotiating. But before we begin, disclaimer. The financial information contained in this video is for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing specific financial advice. You should contact a financial advisor to obtain specific financial advice. Okay, guys, so we're over halfway done with the Money Manager's basic series. And we're negotiations and composite finance. So this is part 1, and this is going to be on negotiations. So once again, part 1. So when we're talking about negotiations, a lot of the times people think that is a bad word, but it's actually very good. But the reason why I'm saying that it's very good and most people think that it's bad is perception. Remember, perception is key. So when we're talking about negotiations, there's outcomes that we want when we engage in negotiations. So I have 6 basic scenarios of what'll happen in a in negotiating a deal. So the first one is a lose-lose. So a lose-lose is where neither gets what they want and they both feel like they put in more than whatever they got out of it. The next one is a lose-tie. So a lose-tie happens where one is a null set. They don't really benefit from what happened to it, but they also don't, it's not to their detriment, where for the other side, it was done to their detriment. The next one is a tie. So that's pretty much a null set where both parties or all the parties involved get pretty much essentially what they put in and nothing more. The next one is a win tie. So that's where there's no real effect to one of the parties in the negotiation, but for the other ones is a huge win, or they benefit from it. The next one is a win-lose. A win-lose is where one benefits at the expense of another. And then a win-win is where all parties involved benefit. So what we're going to talk about now, I'm going to leave out the tie scenarios. And we're going to talk about lose-lose, win-lose, and win-win scenarios. So what you guys just saw is what actually happens when you get into a lose-lose scenario, a win-lose scenario, and a win-win scenario. But like I told you before, perception is key. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different perceptions that exist in each scenario. So in a lose-lose scenario, what ends up happening is one party feels that the other party won and that they lost. So essentially, a lose-lose scenario is perceived that it's actually a win-lose scenario. Sorry, hold on. Sorry about that, guys. Getting over a cold, but it's when the other consider the other one to win. Similarly, like a win-lose scenario, when the actual truth is neither one of them got anything out of it. The next one is a win-lose scenario, and this is often thought to be the only kind of scenario that's possible to become successful. So this is what you quote-unquote must do to become successful. And the last one is a win-win scenario. What I'm going to suggest to you guys is this is the only scenario that you guys should be looking for. And once again, this is where everyone in the scenario benefits. Now, the general consensus from what I understand is that a win-win scenario is often thought to be impossible. So that beckons a question. So I just told you that a win-win scenario is the only scenario that you should be striving for. And the general perception, as I described it, is that it's impossible to do. So why would I say that a win-win scenario is the only one you should be looking for if most people think that it's impossible? The main reason is because it's the only one that's sustainable. You have to think about the other one, the lose-lose and the win-lose scenario. They're essentially the only way that those two scenario works is by victimizing the other side. And in cases where both sides are victimized, neither one actually gets anything from it. So you can't build a sustainable relationship if that's always the case. I'm sorry about that, guys, once again, but if you're the victim in a scenario, you guys probably already know, then you're eventually just going to get to a point where you're not going to want to engage in whatever scenario that you're getting into. And if it's the other side where you're always winning, then at someone else's expense, then you're eventually going to get to a point where the only people who are going to want to continue being in the scenario are people that either don't care enough, or that just they actually either like or will not stand up to someone victimizing them. So now I already suggested to you guys that you only strive for win-win scenarios. So let's talk about how you're going to avoid being a part of the others. So these are four things that you need to understand in order to avoid being in any one of the other scenarios. So the first one is you need to understand the needs and wants of the other parties. And that's important because you ultimately need to figure out what they want to get out of whatever scenario or transaction that you guys are engaging in. The next one is you need to strive to fulfill this, except if it's at your own expense. Now, this is an important one, because if you can figure out what they want and give them what they want, this creates a win scenario for the other party. Now, to avoid a lose scenario for yourself, you need to make sure that you're able to do this and you're not putting in more than ultimately what you're getting out. And most people forget this part, and they end up getting victimized by the other side, even if sometimes it could be inadvertent. Now, the next one is understanding your needs and wants. And this is vital because sometimes if you go into a negotiation and you don't understand what your needs or wants are for whatever it is, then what's going to end up happening is you're never going to get it. Like if you guys have ever heard the term, if you have no goal or you have no target, then any path will get you there. And that's exactly what it's talking about here. You need to become solid in what you understand, what your needs or wants are for any scenario. Now, the next one, and this is seek that others can fulfill these, just not at their own expense. Now, if you do what I just said before, and you do understand what you need and want, and you don't do this one, then essentially you can potentially victimize the other side. Now, what I'm saying to you is to make sure that the other side can do this without becoming victimized. Okay, guys, and this is the framework. This is ultimately how you need to approach negotiations, and this is how you build win-win negotiations without worrying about any one of the others. So moving on, we're gonna talk about a job offering or a job opening. Now, sorry about that, guys. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to see the business and we're going to see you for a job opening. So the employer and the employee. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that framework in order to understand in order to understand how we can build a win-win scenario here. So what we're going to do is we're going to for as far as the business is concerned, we're going to look for a company bio or information about the company. So this is the company's message tailored to your wants or needs. Then what you're going to do is you're going to do research. So you're going to research the company, and by doing the research, you're going to make sure that what they're what they're offering you is not going to be at your own expense. So if you find out something about the company that you don't like, or if you find that they have a certain management style that you can't that you can't deal with, you're going to use this in order to figure out whether it is a lose for you. Now, the next one is going to be responsibilities. So responsibilities are what they need and want from you. Now, the requirements are to make sure that what they need or want from you is not at their own expense. So if you guys have ever experienced you asking someone to do something, you ask them beforehand if they know how to do something. If you then allow them to do whatever it is that you needed, and things didn't work out at all, then essentially it could be it could have been intentional or it could have been inadvertent, but either way, you ended up on the lose side of that deal. So moving on to you. So this is what you're going to have to do. So we have a resume, and the reason why you have a resume is you're going to tailor your experiences to their requirements, and this is their wants and needs. So to make sure that it's not at their own expense, they're going to do research on you, and you're going to have a cover letter. Letter is normally called CV. Don't ask me why. I just know that it's called that. And they're going to make sure that it's not at their own expense. So if they see a gap in employment, and it's because you were injured and you couldn't return to work, that's the reason why you stopped working at a job after working there for a year versus something else. So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to go through the interview, and the interview process is going to have interview questions. So the interview questions can help establish your needs and wants. And when they flip it around and then they ask you if you have questions, this is done so it's not at your own expense. So you're gonna need to figure out their management style, the different people that you're working with, what they ultimately need in an employee, what the company is trying to do, not just now, but what the company is trying to do overall. And those are some of the questions that you're going to need to ask. Now, a lot of the times what happens with people is they don't necessarily ask questions. And that could be a huge mistake, because if you don't ask questions, typically what will happen to you in a negotiation, especially with an employer, is sometimes they may actually hire you at your own expense. Now, I'm not here to say that all big businesses as bad, they try to screw over every one of their employees, because not every business is trying to screw over their employees. Remember what I said before, this is to make sure that it's not at your expense, because sometimes it could be inadvertent, meaning that the person that you're talking to, it's not so much that they're trying to screw you over. What they did screwed you over because they didn't understand that was actually a detriment to you, and that's what you want to do with the answers. So let's say that management style is key. Let's say you have a micromanager. So if you have a micromanager, for some people, they're okay being micromanaged. Now, if you're the kind of individual who doesn't like to be micromanaged, then this kind of management style will run you into a lot of problems with your superior, and that's something that you may not want. The most common one would be salary, because a lot of times what will happen is the employer will not bring up salary, or if they do bring up salary, they'll bring it up and ask you what your salary expectations are. The problem with bringing up your salary expectations, or what some employers do, which actually in my opinion is a little messed up, is they'll ask you how much you were making at your prior job. Now, let's say that they ask you how much you're making at your prior job, and then they offer you $5 more per hour than whatever you were making. Now, you may think that you benefited from this because it's $5 more than you were making at your prior job. What you didn't know is the amount that they gave you is about $5 or $7 per hour shy of what they normally pays someone out the gate. Now, in this case, you think that you were in a win scenario, but you were actually in a lose scenario. So in which case it was a win-lose. It was a win-lose because you missed out on opportunity costs for the amount that you could have gotten for the job. Now, when it comes to this, there's also something where it's talking to others about your salary. Now, sometimes what a manager will tell you is that you shouldn't discuss performance or your salary at your job, and that's actually what they probably do is they probably tell you is you should not do that. And it's important that they say that you should not do that, not that you cannot, because it's actually illegal for them to tell you that you can't talk to other employees about what you're currently making at your job. And in which case, it's important for you to know that they actually benefit from when you don't they benefit in negotiation, and they get negotiating power if you don't know how much everybody else is making. So if you have a scenario where you don't know how much everyone else is making, that creates asymmetric information as far as the employer for what you expect for whatever your initial salary was, and for any time you go for a raise. Now if you know exactly what everyone else is making, you can actually negotiate a lot better. Whereas if you have no idea what everyone else is making, you don't know if they're giving you a lowball offer or not. Where the employer, you have to understand, they have negotiated with everyone else, so they know what everyone else is making. But that's the thing, you don't know what everyone else is making, so that actually gives them asymmetric information and more power in negotiation. And this is actually one of the problems that a lot of people have with negotiations. And I definitely think it's something that we should be doing more, and we should be talking to our coworkers of, hey, how much are you making here? Hey, how much sorry, I'm making this amount of money. Typically they don't want because it's considered bad in taste, or it could be that it's quote unquote frowned upon. But listen, you need to look out for yourself in certain scenarios when you're dealing with an employer, and that's one of the ways that you're going to do it. So now let's get into ways that you can avoid being on the losing side of a transaction. So these are a couple of things that you can do. Let's say if you were looking for a job that can help you with increasing your negotiation power. One of the things that you can do with your negotiation power, what you can do is have an alternative income. So this is a side job that you have. It could be a part-time business, or it could be investments that you can gather funds from. And essentially what you're going to do here is you're going to make sure that even if you do lose your job, even if you do either lose your job, or if you're going to go from one job to another, that you still have a means of making money, at least to float you between the time that you leave the last job and you get that last paycheck, and the time that you start the new job and you gain that paycheck. So the next one is contingency, and that one's going to have like an emergency fund for 3 to 6 months of expenses. Now, the reason why I have an emergency fund put here is because if you have an emergency fund and you're sitting on cash, if they're making you a lowball offer and you can tell that it's a lowball offer, you actually have built-in patience. So by building in patience into your negotiation, if they decide that, like, okay, so we'll get back to you in 2 weeks, and you can't wait 2 weeks because you're gonna need money, that actually puts you at a disadvantage. Where if you have 3 to 6 months of expenses and they say, like, okay, listen, we're gonna need about a month, and you decide that, like, well, I mean, if you're gonna wait a month to get back to me, then I'm just gonna look for something else, and then you could just tell him, oh, I'm sorry, I think I'm gonna go with another company. Thank you for calling me in and walking away. Where that's what you kind of want, and that is inside a bit, and that's inside as an employee. If you have a prior job, meaning that you can go back to a job, or similarly to the first one where you have a side job or something that you do part-time work, then you can do that as well. And this can work inside or outside of a business. So if you have a business and you're taking on new jobs, like you're a contractor, if you take this and you have 3 to 6 months of expenses, and you're doing stuff like this, this could definitely benefit you when you're making negotiations with other companies. The next one is a money management plan, and this one is setting up goals. So if you guys remember the first video, the overview, when I talked to you about the business manager that had $1,500 for rent and $1,500 for other necessary expenses. I really do apologize for coughing, guys. But in that scenario, those two expenditures should account for 60%, which is $3,000. So that means the amount of income that he needs is $5,000. And that's exactly what you're going to do with your money management plan. You're going to use that to figure out how much money you need and how much your expenses are going to be. Because once you have that, that actually makes it better for negotiations, because you know ultimately how much you're going to need in order to do it. The next one is location. So you're going to ensure that whatever means of transportation you have to and from whatever location you're going to be working at is going to be, and here's a rule of thumb, of 45 minutes away one way. The reason why I say you're going to make sure that it's 45 minutes is because if it's more than that, that could, on a psychological level, bring up stress. Mainly because, let's say that you live an hour away from an hour away from your job. That would mean if for some reason you overslept, let's say 5 minutes, that could potentially mean that you're going to get to your job somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes, where the 45 minute mark is to mitigate stuff like that happening. So as far as an employee, let's say that you live in Nassau County, New York, and you're going to Midtown Manhattan. So if you're going to be making that kind of commute, chances are you're going to be using the Long Island Railroad, LIRR, where pretty much anywhere in Nassau County, it would take about 45 minutes to get to Midtown Manhattan. And the reason why you're doing this is to make sure that you have more than enough time to get to and from there. So inside of a job, let's say that you're at your office and you're going to be working on site. So you're going to have to make sure that it takes less than 45 minutes to get there. Because if it takes more than 45 minutes, what'll end up happening is, let's say for some reason say, hey, and you're dealing with a client, and the client says, hey, I am gone. I'm gonna be out of the office for about 2 hours. If it took you an hour to get there, then you may be better off just waiting for the client for 2 hours, mainly because by the time you get back to your office or your location, you're going to have to go out and go back to the client. So it would be more beneficial for you in a case like that for you to stay there. The only thing is, if you stay there for 2 hours, then that's 2 hours you could have been using working on something else or another part of the business. And we want to mitigate stuff like that happening. So you better maximize your time and your efforts. So the next one is motivation. So if you guys remember the money manager's process, the last step and the most vital step is staying motivated, and that's exactly what you want to do here. You want to use all of what I'm talking about here to make sure that you're motivated and engaged whenever you're going into anything that you're doing with your personal finances. And the last is fulfillment, and that's happiness. So as far as happiness is concerned, all I'm trying to say here, I'm not trying to make it all light and airy, but I'm actually trying to be practical here. You're going to need to do stuff that makes you happy. And in order to do stuff that makes you happy, you're gonna have to do things related to guilt-free spending. You're going to have to give yourself some sort of rewards for doing whatever it is you're going to do. And this goes back to motivation. On a subconscious level, you're not going to be motivated if you keep going, only paying for your necessary expenses, stacking the rest away, and not having any money for you specifically. And that's one of the reasons why leisurely spending is built into the income allocation. Okay, guys, so this is going to be the last part of the part one in the video. So that one, what we're going to have here is we're actually going to have how to avoid others being on the lose side. So these are different things that you can do to help avoid the other side being on the lose side of whatever negotiations that you're doing. The other one is to help them understand what their needs and wants are. So this is for cases where you can't figure out what their needs and wants are, and they can't clearly state what their needs and wants are. You're going to help them figure out exactly what that is. And then what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that it matches up with your needs and abilities. So similarly, what we did before, sorry about that, guys. But remember what we did before. You're going to have to make sure that it's not at your own expense, so that you're not on the lose side of whatever negotiation you're doing. Now the next couple of steps, that's actually going to be a bit choosy, and you're going to have to make sure first that this person is not trying to benefit at your expense. Because one of the drawbacks to this, unfortunately, is the information that I'm giving you. If if your will is to use it with malice against other people, sadly, this is where you can do this. And if someone else is uh going to use malice against you, this is where it's going to happen. And that's going to be, you're going to share your needs and wants. You're going to share your needs and wants, and then the next step is you're going to evaluate their reaction. The reason why you're going to evaluate their reaction is because you ultimately need to see, do they get it, and do they want to proceed? Is this going to be beneficial for them? Is there going to be a way for them to match up their abilities without it being at their own expense? You're going to make sure that you cover that. And you're also going to evaluate their reaction to make sure that they're not actually trying to screw you over, or that you didn't just give them information that now makes them want to screw you over. And that's one of the things that you're going to have to deal with. Now, once you can make sure that they match up, you also want to make sure that you specify your pain points. Now, once again, if the person wants to exploit you or do something like that, you have to be cautious, and that's why you want to evaluate their reaction. Because if you can evaluate their reaction, then you can ultimately you're going to be able to tell what's going on with this person. Now the next one, or the last one for this video, is going to be seek alternatives. Now this is advanced. So this would be the case where if you had for some reason you had an individual, and you were looking to make a deal with them, but the deal wouldn't work out. If you can actually change the deal so that you can work with this person on a deal that would work, that in and of itself would be a win-win. On top of the actual deal that you have being another win-win. So guys, that's all I have for you as far as negotiations. So this is part 1 of the video, so stay tuned to part 2, and I'll see you there. Welcome back. Hey guys, it's Alex. This is 3.5 negotiations and composite finance, the most effective way to negotiate and change a financial management plan.